Major Miller thought he was the best sniper in the 101st. He thought the black woman standing in the freezing slush was just a lost cook from the village. He called her a diversity joke. He told her to find a mop and scrub the latrines. He had no idea he was looking at a major from the Shadow Division, a woman with 214 confirmed kills who was sent to evaluate his failure. And in exactly 10 seconds, she's going to shoot the cigarette out of his mouth from 1,000 yards away, without even using a scope. The Ardennes forest was a graveyard of ambition. The year was 1944, and the snow didn't just fall, it buried. At Outpost 9, the morale was as thin as the soup. Major Miller, a man whose ego was larger than his tactical mind, stood on the makeshift firing line. He was surrounded by his golden boys, snipers he had hand-picked, not for their skill, but for their lineage. "Target at 1,000 yards, Miller shouted, his voice cracking in the sub-zero air. His lead shooter, a corporal with trembling hands, squeezed the trigger. Crack! The bullet kicked up snow 50 yards short of the wooden silhouette. Miller cursed, spitting on the ground. Pathetic. The Nazis are closing in, and you lot couldn't hit a barn from the inside. That was when the transport truck groaned to a halt. A lone figure stepped out. She wore a heavy civilian wool coat, a thick scarf wrapped around her head, and boots caked in frozen mud. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a refugee. "Who the hell let a civilian on my range?" Miller bellowed, storming toward her. "This is a restricted zone, girl. The kitchen is 3 miles back. Start walking." Annalise Thorne didn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and as steady as the mountains, tracked the movement of the wind through the pines. She noticed the way the smoke from Miller's cigarette drifted, 7 knots, gusting to 10. "I'm not lost, Major," Annalise said. Her voice was a low, melodic hum that somehow cut through the howling wind. "I'm here to see the 101st's elite sniper unit, but all I see are men wasting ammunition." The range went silent. The Golden Boys lowered their rifles, stunned. Miller's face turned a deep, bruised purple. He took a long drag of his cigarette, leaning in until he could blow the smoke directly into her face. "Is this a joke?" Miller asked, his voice dripping with venom. "You come on to my range looking like a washerwoman and critique my men? Do you even know what a rifle is, or do you only know how to handle a frying pan?" The soldiers erupted in laughter. One of them tossed a potato at her feet. "Hey, cook, aim that at the pot." Annalise looked down at the potato, then back at Miller. She reached into her coat and pulled out a leather-wrapped case. She unrolled it with the precision of a surgeon. Inside sat a custom M1903 Springfield, the wood dark and oiled, the bolt polished to a mirror finish. "I know what a rifle is, Major. I also know that your lead shooter is compensating for a wind that died 5 minutes ago. Your targets are still standing because your ego is louder than your math." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at the rifle, then at her. He didn't see the Shadow Division insignia hidden under her lapel. He didn't see the 4th Battalion crest on her dog tags. He only saw a black woman who dared to challenge his authority. "Fine," Miller hissed. "You want to play soldier? There's the target, 1,000 yards. If you miss, I'm having you arrested for trespassing and sent to a labor camp. If you hit it, well, you won't, because girls like you don't have the stomach for the steel." He put the cigarette back in his mouth, standing sideways to the target, a smug grin on his face. He felt safe. He was certain she couldn't even see the target through the fog. Annalise didn't go to the bench. She didn't use a sandbag. She dropped into the slush on one knee. She didn't even flip up the long-range sights. She closed her left eye. She felt the rhythm of the wind. She waited for the lull, that half-second where the world holds its breath between gusts. "Whisper," she whispered. "Don't blink." Crack! The sound was different from the corporal's shot. It was sharper, more violent. Miller didn't move. He felt a sudden hot friction against his lips. The cigarette was gone. Not dropped, vaporized. A tiny shred of white paper fluttered in the air. The wooden target 1,000 yards away didn't just fall. The head of the silhouette shattered into splinters. Miller's hand went to his mouth. He felt the sting of tobacco ash on his tongue. He looked at the empty air where his cigarette had been. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "That was a 1 in a million fluke," Miller screamed, his voice high and terrified. "Arrest her, now!" "I wouldn't do that, Major," Annalise said, standing up and dusting the snow from her coat. She reached into her inner pocket and pulled out a set of gold-bordered orders. She threw them into the slush at his feet. Miller looked down. His eyes widened. The orders were signed by the Supreme Allied Commander. They identified the bearer as Major Annalise Thorne, Chief of Tactical Evaluation, Shadow Division. "The joke is over, Miller," Annalise said, her voice now cold enough to freeze blood. "Your unit is being disbanded, and you're being demoted to private. Pick up those orders. They're the last thing you'll ever receive from a superior officer." Miller looked from the orders to Annalise, then back to the shattered target a mile away. The washerwoman was gone. Standing before him was the most dangerous sniper in the European theater, and she was just getting started. The silence that followed the shot was heavier than the snow. Major Miller, now stripped of his pride and his cigarette, remained frozen. His mouth still hung open, as if waiting for the smoke that would never come. His golden boys stood like statues, their rifles suddenly feeling like toys in the presence of a real weapon. Ma'am, one of the corporals stammered, his hand instinctively rising to a salute. Annalise didn't look at him. She was already stripping her Springfield, cleaning the bolt with a cloth she pulled from her sleeve. "Save it, Corporal. Salutes don't stop bullets. Math does, and right now, your math is failing you." She turned her gaze toward the North Ridge. The fog was thickening, swirling in patterns that made the trees look like shifting ghosts. To the untrained eye, it was just a storm. To Annalise, it was a curtain being drawn. "Miller," she said, her voice snapping like a whip, "get your men into the foxholes. Double the watch on the eastern flank, now." Miller, still reeling from the shock of his demotion, found a spark of his old arrogance. "Now wait just a minute, Thorne. You might have a fancy rank, but this is my outpost. We haven't seen a German scout in 3 weeks. The front is 10 miles south." Annalise stepped into his personal space. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she loomed like a mountain. "The front is wherever the enemy decides it is. Did you notice the birds, Miller? No? That's because they stopped singing 10 minutes ago. Did you notice the wind? It shifted against the grain of the clouds. That's the heat signature of a motorized column moving through the valley." Before Miller could respond, the world turned orange. A mortar round screamed out of the gray sky, slamming into the command jeep parked 20 yards away. The explosion threw Miller into the slush. Shrapnel whistled through the air, shredding the tents and sending the golden boys screaming for cover. "Ambush!" someone shrieked. The tree line erupted. It wasn't the rabid fire of a scout team. It was the rhythmic, terrifying chatter of MG-42s, the Hitler's baw saw. Tracers tore through the snow in bright green streaks, stitching the outpost together. Miller scrambled toward a crate, his face pale. "They're everywhere. We're surrounded. How did they get past the perimeter?" "They didn't get past it," Annalise said, calmly sliding a 5-round clip into her rifle. "They've been sitting there since before I arrived, waiting for the light to fail. You were so busy mocking a washerwoman that you didn't see the white camo scouts moving 300 yards from your nose." She didn't duck. She didn't panic. She walked toward a pile of stone ruins that offered a clear view of the ridge. Bullets kicked up puffs of white powder at her feet, but she moved with a terrifying, rhythmic grace. "Corporal," she shouted to the young man who had saluted her, "get on that 30 cal. Fire in 3-second bursts at the base of the Twin Pines. Don't look for targets, just suppress the gap."
The boy obeyed, the machine gun beginning to thump. Annalise dropped behind a jagged rock, the cold of the stone seeping into her bones. She didn't look through her scope yet. She used her naked eye, scanning for the ghost of the unit, the German officer directing the fire. There. 600 yards out, beneath a rocky overhang, a man in a white hooded parka raised a set of binoculars. He was the conductor of this symphony of death. Annalise adjusted her windage knob. Click, click. The wind was screaming now, a cross breeze that would carry a standard bullet 4 feet off course. But Annalise wasn't firing a standard bullet. She was firing match-grade rounds she had hand-loaded herself. She exhaled. The world slowed. She saw the snowflake land on the barrel of her rifle. She waited for the moment between heartbeats. Crack! On the ridge, the German officer's binoculars shattered. He spun and fell, disappearing into the ravine. Immediately, the German fire became erratic. The conductor was gone. The orchestra was falling apart. "Miller!" Annalise yelled over the roar of the mortars. "If you want to keep that rank you think you deserve, get your men to the tree line. We don't defend this hole, we take the ridge." Miller looked at her, then at the chaos around him. For the first time, he saw the difference between a man who wore a uniform and a woman who was born for war. He grabbed his carbine, his eyes finding a flicker of resolve. "You heard the Major!" Miller roared. "Move out! Follow the ghost!" As the men of the 101st charged into the whiteout, led by the woman they had mocked only an hour before, the German snipers realized their mistake. They weren't fighting a broken outpost. They were being hunted by a shadow. The counterattack had pushed the Germans back, but the victory was a hollow shell. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, the blizzard transformed from a nuisance into a monster. The temperature plummeted so fast that the oil in the men's rifles began to thicken like molasses. Annalise stood at the edge of the ridge, her breath a thick white plume. The 101st had taken the high ground, but they were bleeding. Miller sat nearby, his hands shaking as he tried to wrap a bandage around a private's arm. He looked up at Annalise, and for the first time, the racism and ego were gone, replaced by a haunting realization. "They aren't retreating, are they?" Miller asked, his voice cracking. "No," Annalise replied, her eyes never leaving the tree line across the valley. "They're pruning. They cut away the weak scouts so the specialist could have a clear field of fire." "Specialist? There's a man out there. He's been watching us for an hour. He didn't fire during the skirmish. He was waiting for the light to hit the golden hour. He's a Jaeger,
the German mountain elite. They call him der weiße Geist, the white ghost. As if summoned by her words, a sharp ping echoed across the valley. The private Miller was helping didn't scream, he simply slumped over. A single hole had appeared in the center of his helmet, clean and precise. "Get down!" Annalise roared, tackling Miller into a shallow depression in the rock.
A second shot shattered the rock where Annalise's head had been a millisecond before. This wasn't the chaotic chatter of the MG-42. This was the rhythmic, patient work of a master. The Jaeger was over 800 yards away, hidden in a world of white on white, shooting through a crosswind that should have made accuracy impossible. "We can't see him," Miller hissed, pressing his face into the frozen dirt. "He's a mile away in a white sheet. We're sitting ducks." "He wants you to run," Annalise said, her heart rate slowing to a steady, rhythmic thrum. "He's counting on your panic. He's waiting for a head to pop up over that ledge." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, cracked shaving mirror. She tied it to the end of a cleaning rod and slowly poked it above the rim of the rock. Crack! The mirror shattered instantly. "She's fast," she muttered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "But he's arrogant. He's shooting at the first sign of movement." Annalise turned to Miller. "I need your helmet and your coat, now." "What? You'll freeze." "Do it, Private Miller. That's an order." Miller stripped off his heavy coat and helmet. Annalise stuffed the coat with snow and dead brush, propping it up against a splintered pine tree 10 yards to their left. She placed the helmet on top, tilting it just enough to catch the dying sunlight. "Now," she whispered, "when I tell you, I want you to throw that rock at the base of the tree, not on it, beside it." She crawled away from Miller, moving through the deep powder like a serpent. She didn't go toward the decoy. She moved 40 yards to the right, burying herself in a snowdrift until only the tip of her rifle barrel was exposed. She wrapped her red scarf around the muzzle to break up the heat signature of the coming shot. "Now," she signaled. Miller hurled the rock. It hit the tree with a loud thwack. The snow-stuffed Major Miller decoy shifted. Crack! The German fired. The bullet tore through the decoy's helmet. In that split second, she saw it. A tiny, microscopic puff of gray smoke from a clump of frozen bushes on the opposite peak. It was gone in a heartbeat, but a heartbeat was all she needed. She didn't use the crosshairs. She knew the wind had just gusted to 12 knots. She held the rifle high and to the left, aiming at a patch of empty air 3 feet above the target. She calculated the bullet's arc, the spin of the earth, and the density of the freezing mist. She whispered a prayer her mother had taught her in the Georgia heat, a world away from this ice. Crack! The Springfield recoiled into her shoulder like a familiar hand. Across the valley, a figure in a white ghillie suit rose slightly from the bushes, clutched at his throat, and tumbled forward. He slid down the icy slope, a streak of crimson marking his path, until he vanished into the dark pines below. The white ghost was dead. Annalise stayed in the snow for 5 full minutes, waiting for a partner that never fired. When she finally stood, she was covered in a layer of frost, looking like a statue brought to life. She walked back to Miller, who was staring at the distant peak in disbelief. "You hit him, through a blizzard, from another mountain. Who are you?" Annalise picked up her rifle and began walking toward the center of the camp. "I'm the person you said shouldn't be here, Miller. Now get the men ready. The Jaeger was the distraction. The real army is 10 minutes behind him."
The German forces broke under the relentless, precise fire. With their Jaeger eliminated, their command structure dissolved into panic. By dawn, the threat had receded, leaving behind a battlefield scarred with craters and stained with crimson snow. The medvac choppers, fighting through the lingering storm, finally arrived, their rotors chopping the frigid air into a maelstrom of white. Annalise stood apart from the men, watching the wounded being loaded. She looked like a ghost herself, her face streaked with soot and ice, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The Springfield rifle was slung loosely over her shoulder, a natural extension of her arm. Major Miller, now just Private Miller again, approached her tentatively. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. His uniform was torn, his face pale and etched with a mixture of awe and fear. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank you. You saved us all." Annalise turned her gaze to him. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound weariness. "Don't thank me, Private. Thank the enemy. They taught me how to put a crosshair on a man and pull the trigger." Miller flinched. I don't understand. Why did you leave the Marines? With your skill, you could have been a general." She walked toward a makeshift aid station, her boots crunching in the snow. Miller followed, drawn by an invisible force. Inside, the medic was wrapping a soldier's shattered arm. The air was thick with the smell of blood and antiseptic. "Sit," Annalise ordered, pointing to a vacant cot. "You have shrapnel in your arm, and you're in shock." Miller sat, numbly allowing the medic to attend to his minor wounds. Annalise sat opposite him, her hands resting on the rifle across her lap. Her gaze drifted to the faces of the wounded, young, old, terrified. They talk about confirmed kills like it's a number on a scoreboard. They don't tell you that every number is a man, a son, a father, maybe even a man who thought he was fighting for a cause he believed in. Miller looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "But you saved us. You saved my life." "And to do that," she continued, "I had to become something I swore I'd never be again. A predator, a ghost. I served 8 years in the Marine Scout Snipers, 2 deployments to Fallujah, 143 confirmed kills." Miller gasped. 143? No one has that many. That's a legend. "It's a curse," Annalise corrected, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "After my second tour, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. The one who reached for his mother's picture, the one who whispered a name before he died, the one who just stared at me, knowing it was over." She paused, her voice growing even softer. "The military wanted me to be a trainer, to teach others to be ghosts, but I couldn't. I couldn't pass on the sickness. I wanted to be normal, just Kat, just a wife, not a killer." Miller looked at his bandaged arm, then at the tears in her eyes. "You never told your husband?" "How do you tell the man you love that you're a monster?" Annalise asked, a raw vulnerability in her voice. "That every time he looks at you, he's looking at death." "I buried it. I moved on. I thought it was gone." The medic finished with Miller and moved to the next cot. Annalise stood, walking to the door of the aid station. The medvac choppers were lifting off, carrying away the broken bodies and shattered lives. "The last kill I made in Fallujah was a kid, barely 17. He was running from a building we'd just cleared. He had a rusted AK-47, but he wasn't aiming it. He was just running, away from the war, away from everything. She took a deep, shuddering breath. My commanding officer gave the order to fire, and I did. Clean shot, headshot. He went down. I saw his body twitch in the dust, and then nothing. But he was an enemy, Miller stammered. He was a child, Annalise said, her voice rising now, filled with a quiet anguish. And I was supposed to be a hero, but that night I just felt cold, empty. I went home, and I started a new life. I tried to forget. She finally turned, her gaze sweeping over the ravaged outpost. But the war never really leaves you. It just waits. It waits for another blizzard, another ambush, another major who needs saving. And then you become the ghost again. Miller looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a rank, not as a race, but as a woman carrying an unbearable weight. The disrespect, the anger, the ego were utterly gone. All that remained was a profound, chilling respect. What happens now, Major, when the command arrives, when they see your record? Miller asked, a new deference in his voice. Annalise walked out into the cold, leaving Miller to his thoughts. Now, she said, her voice carried on the wind, now I have to find a way to bury the ghost again, and this time I don't know if I can. The storm finally broke, leaving behind a sky so blue it looked artificial. But for Annalise, the clarity of the morning was the most dangerous part. High Command's helicopters were already on the horizon. Sikorsky R-4s buzzing like angry hornets. They were coming for the story. They were coming for the legend.
In the center of the camp, General Sterling stepped off the lead bird. He was a man of brass and starch, his eyes scanning the carnage with a clinical detachment until they landed on Annalise. Beside him, a group of military journalists prepared their cameras. "Major Thorne," Sterling said, his voice booming across the silent outpost. "We received the report from Private Miller. 7 confirmed kills in 12 minutes, a 1,000-yard cigarette shot with a non-zeroed iron sight. They're calling you the Angel of the Ardennes back at HQ." The journalists stepped forward, lenses clicking. They wanted the hero. They wanted the face of the black female sniper who had humiliated the Nazis and saved the 101st. Annalise stood her ground, her hand tightened around the sling of her Springfield. "I didn't do it for the headlines, General, and I didn't do it for the rank. I did it because your officers were incompetent and your men were dying." The air turned brittle. Sterling's smile didn't fade, but it hardened. "Careful, Major. You're a hero now. Don't ruin the narrative with the truth of the field. We're moving you to London. You'll be the face of the new recruitment drive, the shadow of justice, the first black woman to receive the Distinguished Service Cross." "No," Annalise said. The word was small, but it stopped the general mid-stride. "Excuse me? I'm resigning my commission effective immediately," she said, her voice echoing off the frozen pines. "You want a poster girl? Find someone who hasn't seen what I've seen. You want a shadow? Go find a ghost. I'm going home to my husband." Sterling stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "Thorne, don't be a fool. You have a gift. You're a weapon. You can't just walk away from 214 kills and act like you're a civilian. The world won't let you."
"The world doesn't have a choice," Annalise replied. She reached into her coat and pulled out her sniper's logbook, the small black book that held the dates, times, and wind speeds of every life she had taken. She dropped it into the smoldering embers of the command jeep's wreckage. She turned to Miller, who was standing at attention nearby. He looked at her not as a diversity hire or a cook, but with a reverence that bordered on worship. "Miller," she said, "when you get your stripes back, and you will, if you're half the man I think you became last night, remember one thing. The rifle is the last resort. If you have to use it, you've already lost the peace." She walked past the general, past the flashing cameras, and past the shocked soldiers. She walked to the gate where her civilian transport sat idling. Her husband, David, was leaning against the fender. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen the general salute her, and she had seen her walk away. He didn't ask about the kills. He didn't ask about the secret rank. He just held out her hand-knit wool scarf, the one with the uneven stitches. "Ready to go, Cat?" he asked softly. "Ready," she whispered. As the car pulled away from Outpost 9, Annalise looked back one last time. She saw the soldiers watching her, a black woman who had outshot their best, outled their leaders, and outlasted their hate. She was leaving the war behind, but she knew the ghost would always be there, just under the surface, waiting for the wind to shift. But for today, the only thing she had to hit was the road home. Annalise Thorne left the forest that day, but her legend was just beginning. If you want to see the secret mission she took in Fallujah that changed her forever, click the subscribe button on the screen now. You won't believe what she found in the ruins.